In a small town surrounded by dusty roads and tall olive trees, there stood a little church with wooden doors that creaked every time someone walked in. The people there believed deeply in God, but many of them had forgotten something important about the heart of Jesus. Every Sunday they gathered inside, holding their Bibles close. They sang loudly, prayed passionately, and spoke about righteousness. But outside those church doors stood people who felt they could never walk in. Some were poor, some were broken, some were different from what the town called normal. And among them was a young man named Daniel. Daniel had grown up hearing about Jesus all his life. He believed in God with his whole heart. He prayed at night, asked for forgiveness when he failed, and tried his best to live with kindness. But there was one thing about Daniel that made people whisper behind his back. Daniel loved another man. The people in town judged him harshly. They pointed fingers and spoke loudly about sin. Some said he could never belong in the church. Others said he should hide who he was if he wanted to be accepted. But Daniel knew something deep in his heart. He had never chosen who he loved. It had been part of him for as long as he could remember, something woven quietly into his life long before he understood it. Still, the judgment came. One night, Daniel sat alone outside the church steps, looking up at the stars. He held his Bible in his hands and whispered a prayer. "Lord, if I am truly wrong, why did you make me this way? And if I'm not, why do your people treat me like I don't belong?" The wind rustled through the olive trees, and the town fell silent. Inside the church, a man named Thomas was preparing for Sunday's sermon. Thomas was known as the most outspoken preacher in town. He often spoke strongly about sin, warning people about judgment and punishment. But Thomas carried a secret. Every night when the house was quiet and the lights were off, he would open his computer and look at things he would never dare speak about in public. Things he knew were wrong. Things he hid behind locked doors and private screens. When morning came, he would close the laptop, dress in his finest clothes, and stand behind the pulpit speaking about righteousness. But God sees what doors hide. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. Something stirred inside his conscience. A verse echoed in his mind over and over again. "Why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but fail to notice the plank in your own?" The words hit him like thunder. He realized something that shook him deeply. He had been judging people while hiding his own sins, speaking as if he were righteous while living a double life behind closed doors. The next morning, Thomas walked outside early and saw Daniel sitting on the church steps. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Then Thomas sat down beside him. "I owe you an apology," the preacher said quietly. Daniel looked surprised. "You do?" Thomas nodded slowly. "I spent years thinking it was my job to judge people, but the truth is I'm a sinner too, and sinners don't sit on God's throne." Daniel stayed silent. Thomas continued. "Jesus never told us to condemn each other. He told us to love one another, pray for each other, and leave judgment to God." He looked down at his hands. "None of us are perfect, not me, not anyone in that church. We all struggle with temptation, we all fall short." Daniel's eyes softened. "So where do I belong?" he asked. Thomas pointed toward the church doors. "Right there with the rest of us broken people." He smiled gently. Because the church was never meant to be a museum for saints. It was meant to be a hospital for sinners. Daniel looked at the doors for a long moment. Then he asked something that would stay with Thomas forever. If God already knows everything about us, why do people pretend they can hide from him? Thomas chuckled quietly. "That's the strange thing about humans," he said. "We think we can fool God while judging each other." He shook his head. "But God knows every thought, every struggle, every secret. You can't lie to the Creator who formed your heart." The church bell rang in the distance. People began arriving for Sunday service. Some of them stared at Daniel. But something had changed. Thomas stood up and held the door open. "Come inside," he said. And that morning, the sermon was very different. Instead of preaching about condemnation, Thomas spoke about humility. Instead of speaking about judgment, he spoke about mercy. He reminded everyone of a simple truth many had forgotten. Every person on earth is a sinner. No sinner has the authority to judge another sinner. Only God sees the whole story of a human soul. And if Jesus spent his life welcoming the rejected, loving the outcast, and forgiving the broken, then the people who follow him should do the same. Because love was never the problem. Judgment was. And the only door that truly matters is the one God opens with grace. Please feel free to follow, subscribe, comment, like, and share. This helps you to stay connected to me, and it helps me to remain here creating more content for you. Thank you, love always, Maria DC Santiago.